One decision, one moment. Everything changes. Obi-Wan Kenobi stands on Police Massa, holding a newborn in his arms. Baby Luke Skywalker, the child of prophecy, son of the man who became a monster. And Obi-Wan makes a choice that shatters everything we know. He doesn't leave Luke on Tatooine. He doesn't walk away. Instead, he takes the child with him into exile and begins training him immediately, from birth, every single day. No childhood, no normal life. Just the Force, the lightsaber, and preparation for a war Luke never chose. This isn't the Luke Skywalker you know. This Luke never flew through Beggar's Canyon, never dreamed about the stars while cleaning moisture evaporators, never met Ben Kenobi as a mysterious hermit, because Ben Kenobi is the only parent he's ever known. By the time he's 10 years old, Luke can manipulate objects with his mind effortlessly. By 15, he's mastered lightsaber forms that took other Jedi decades to learn. By 20, he's more powerful than most Jedi Knights ever were. But here's the terrifying question. Is he ready for what's coming? Or has Obi-Wan just created something dangerous, a weapon so powerful that even he can't control it? Because training Luke from birth doesn't just change Luke. It changes Vader. It changes Leia. It changes the entire war against the Empire. And most critically, it changes whether Luke Skywalker becomes a hero or whether he follows his father's path into darkness. Let's explore how this single decision would reshape the entire galaxy. Trust me, what happens next will blow your mind. Picture the moment it all begins. Padme has just given birth to twins. Moments later, she dies. Obi-Wan is holding baby Luke, standing on Polis Massa, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that's happened. Anakin, his brother, his Padawan, has fallen to the dark side and become Darth Vader. The Jedi Order is destroyed. The Republic has become the Empire, and now Obi-Wan faces the most important choice of his life. In the original timeline, he splits up the twins. Leia goes to Bail Organa on Alderaan. Luke goes to Tatooine to live with his aunt and uncle. Obi-Wan watches from a distance, waiting. But in this timeline, grief consumes him. Guilt tears at him. He failed Anakin. He won't fail again. He looks down at this innocent child and makes a vow. No more waiting, no more hiding, no more mistakes. He will take Luke with him. He will train him from the very beginning. He will mold him into the perfect Jedi, the one who can finish what Anakin started, destroy the Sith, and bring balance to the Force. It sounds like the right decision. It sounds heroic, but as we'll see, it might be the most dangerous choice Obi-Wan ever makes. This decision would change everything. First, let's think about where Obi-Wan would go. He can't stay on Tatooine because that was only chosen as Luke's home because of the Lars family. Without that connection, Tatooine offers no real advantage. In fact, it's too close to Anakin's past, too obvious if Vader ever decided to search for his offspring. Obi-Wan needs somewhere remote, somewhere hidden, somewhere he can raise and train a child without the Empire finding them. He might choose a planet in the Outer Rim, far from Imperial surveillance. Perhaps he'd go to a world rich in the Force, somewhere Luke could naturally develop his connection to it. There's even the possibility that Obi-Wan might seek out Yoda on Dagobah, combining their efforts to train this child who represents the last hope for the Jedi. Let's assume Obi-Wan chooses a remote planet, one with a small population or perhaps uninhabited altogether. He builds a simple home much like his hut on Tatooine, but this time he's not alone. He has Luke. And from the very beginning, Luke's life is completely different from the one we know. There's no moisture farming, no dreaming about adventure while stuck doing chores, no normal childhood whatsoever. From his earliest memories, Luke knows only the Force, the Jedi teachings, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. As a toddler, Luke would begin with the most basic Force exercises. Obi-Wan would teach him to meditate, to quiet his mind, to feel the Force flowing through all living things. This isn't formal training yet, just gentle guidance, helping Luke develop an awareness of the Force as naturally as breathing. Children are incredibly receptive, and Luke, with his powerful Skywalker bloodline, would show signs of Force sensitivity almost immediately. Objects might float when he's emotional. He might sense Obi-Wan's feelings. He might even have prophetic dreams, just like his father did. Obi-Wan would be a devoted teacher, but also a cautious one. He carries the burden of Anakin's fall with him every single day. He sees Anakin in Luke's eyes, in his expressions, in his natural talents, and this terrifies him. Obi-Wan would be constantly analyzing his teaching methods, questioning every decision, wondering if he's pushing too hard or not hard enough. Is he being too strict? Too lenient? Is he forming too much of an attachment to the boy? The Jedi Code forbids attachment, and Obi-Wan believes that attachment was part of what led to Anakin's downfall. But how can he raise a child without forming a bond? It's an impossible situation, and Obi-Wan would struggle with this paradox throughout Luke's entire childhood. By the time Luke is 5 or 6 years old, he would already be more trained than most younglings in the old Jedi Temple. He would know the Jedi Code by heart. He would be able to meditate for extended periods. His Force sensitivity would be highly developed, allowing him to sense emotions, move small objects, and perhaps even have basic precognitive abilities. But here's where things get interesting. Luke would also be incredibly lonely. In the original timeline, Luke had friends. He had Owen and Beru. He had a normal social life, even if it was humble. In this timeline, Luke has only Obi-Wan. There are no other children, no friends his age, no normal interactions. His entire world revolves around Jedi training and his master. This isolation would shape Luke's personality in profound ways. He might become more serious, more contemplative, more mature than his years. But he would also lack something crucial: the social development that comes from interacting with peers, the ability to form normal relationships, the understanding of how ordinary people live. Luke would be powerful in the Force, yes, but he would also be sheltered in a way that could become a weakness. As Luke grows older, perhaps around 8 or 9, Obi-Wan would begin more intensive training. Lightsaber combat would be introduced. In the old Jedi Order, younglings would begin lightsaber training with training sabers, learning the basic forms under the guidance of multiple instructors. Luke wouldn't have that luxury. He would have only Obi-Wan, but Obi-Wan is one of the greatest lightsaber duelists in Jedi history. Luke would learn Form 3, Soresu, which was Obi-Wan's specialty, the ultimate defensive form. But Obi-Wan, knowing Luke's aggressive Skywalker nature, might also teach him elements of Form 5, Gemso, which focuses on power and counterattacks. This was Anakin's form, and Obi-Wan might believe that teaching Luke to channel his natural aggression properly would prevent the mistakes Anakin made. Luke's progression would be remarkable, without the distractions of normal life, with one-on-one instruction from a Jedi Master, and with his incredible natural talent, Luke would advance at an unprecedented rate. By his early teenage years, perhaps 13 or 14, Luke would be approaching the skill level of a Jedi Knight. His lightsaber abilities would be formidable. His Force powers would be extensive. He would be able to perform mind tricks, enhance his physical abilities, sense danger before it arrives, and manipulate objects with precision. In the original timeline, Luke was powerful but rough, learning on the fly, making mistakes. In this timeline, Luke would be polished, disciplined, and extraordinarily capable. But there's a dark side to this early development, and I'm not talking about the Sith kind of dark side, though we'll get to that. Luke would lack something crucial that made him special in the original timeline. In the movies, Luke's greatest strength wasn't his power or his skill, it was his compassion, his ability to see good in people, his refusal to give up on those he loved. These qualities came from his upbringing with Owen and Beru, from growing up as a normal person with normal emotions and attachments. A Luke raised solely as a Jedi, trained to suppress attachment, might not develop these qualities in the same way. He might become more like the prequel-era Jedi, powerful but emotionally distant, following the code, but lacking the human connection that ultimately allowed him to redeem Vader. Obi-Wan would eventually have to tell Luke about his father. This is an inevitable conversation, and the timing would be crucial. In the original timeline, Obi-Wan waited until Luke was an adult and told him a partial truth, that Vader betrayed and murdered his father. That lie, though well-intentioned, created problems later. In this timeline, Obi-Wan might choose to be more honest, but also more cautious. Perhaps when Luke is around 10 or 11, old enough to understand but young enough to be guided, Obi-Wan would sit him down and explain the truth. Your father was Anakin Skywalker, one of the greatest Jedi who ever lived. He was powerful, heroic, and he was my best friend, my brother. But he fell to the dark side. He was seduced by a Sith Lord who promised him the power to save those he loved. He became Darth Vader, and he helped destroy the Jedi Order. Luke's reaction to this revelation would be complex. On one hand, he would understand intellectually. He's been trained in Jedi philosophy. He knows about the dark side. He understands the dangers of attachment and fear. But emotionally, this would be devastating. His father is alive but has become a monster. His father killed Jedi, perhaps even younglings. His father serves the Empire that has enslaved the galaxy. How would Luke process this? Would he feel anger toward Anakin? Sadness? A determination to not follow the same path? Or might he feel a dangerous curiosity about his father? A desire to understand how someone so powerful could fall? Obi-Wan would watch Luke's reaction carefully, looking for any signs of darkness, any hint that Luke might be tempted down the same path as his father. This would become Obi-Wan's greatest fear, that history would repeat itself, that despite all his efforts, another Skywalker would fall. And this fear might cause Obi-Wan to become even more strict, more controlling, trying to suppress any emotion in Luke that might lead to darkness. But as we know from the prequels, this approach doesn't work. Suppressing emotions doesn't eliminate them. It just drives them underground where they can fester and grow. As Luke enters his teenage years, the question of the rebellion would arise. In the original timeline, Luke was protected from the galactic conflict, living in obscurity until circumstances forced him into the fight. In this timeline, Luke would be aware of the Empire from an early age. Obi-Wan would have explained how the Republic fell, how the Jedi were destroyed, how the Sith now rule the galaxy. Luke would grow up knowing that the Empire is the enemy, that the Emperor is a Sith Lord, and that his own father serves as the Emperor's enforcer. This knowledge would shape Luke's sense of purpose. He wouldn't dream of adventure like he did on Tatooine. Instead, he would be preparing for war, training with the explicit goal of one day confronting the Empire and perhaps even redeeming or defeating his father. But when should Luke enter the fight? This would be a major point of contention between Luke and Obi-Wan. By the time Luke is 16 or 17, he would consider himself ready. He has trained his entire life for this. He's as skilled as many Jedi Knights were. He's young, powerful, and eager to make a difference. But Obi-Wan would be hesitant. He's already lost one apprentice to impatience and arrogance. He would want to wait, to make sure Luke is truly ready, not just in terms of skill, but in terms of wisdom and emotional maturity. Luke, like any teenager, would chafe under this restriction. He would argue that people are suffering, that the rebellion needs help, that waiting is cowardly. These arguments would create tension between master and apprentice, a generational conflict that mirrors the relationship between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan. And between Obi-Wan and Anakin, eventually, a crisis would force their hand. Perhaps they receive word of a major Imperial operation, or the rebellion makes contact seeking help, or they're discovered and must flee. Whatever the catalyst, Luke and Obi-Wan would emerge from hiding and join the fight against the Empire. And this is where the timeline would diverge dramatically from what we know. Imagine the rebellion's reaction to discovering that not only is Obi-Wan Kenobi alive, but he's trained a new Jedi, and not just any Jedi, but the son of Anakin Skywalker. This would be a propaganda victory beyond measure. The Jedi aren't extinct. There's hope. There's someone who can stand against Vader and the Emperor. Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and the other rebellion leaders would be ecstatic, but also cautious. They would want to use Luke and Obi-Wan to deploy them in critical missions to show the galaxy that the Jedi have returned. But Obi-Wan would resist turning Luke into a weapon or a symbol. He would insist on fighting the war in their own way, using the Force as a guide rather than following military strategies. Luke's first real combat experience would be intense. Training is one thing, but actual life-or-death battles are completely different. In the original timeline, Luke's first real fight was the Death Star trench run, and he succeeded partly through luck and raw talent. In this timeline, Luke would enter combat far more prepared, but also far more confident, perhaps overconfident. His first encounter with Imperial forces might go smoothly. His lightsaber skills, his Force abilities, and his training would allow him to handle stormtroopers and even Imperial officers with ease. But this early success could be dangerous. It might feed into the Skywalker arrogance that Obi-Wan fears, and then, inevitably, Luke would encounter Darth Vader. This meeting would happen much differently than it did in the original timeline. In The Empire Strikes Back, Luke was undertrained and emotional, and Vader easily overpowered him. In this timeline, Luke would be far more skilled, and the duel would be much more competitive. But here's the critical difference. In the original timeline, Luke didn't know Vader was his father until Vader revealed it. That revelation was shocking and traumatic. In this timeline, Luke already knows. He's known for years. He's had time to process it, or so he thinks. When Luke ignites his lightsaber and faces Vader for the first time, both of them would feel the Force connection between them. Vader, through his connection to the Force and his own broken memories, would sense something familiar about this young Jedi. And when their blades clash, when Vader sees Luke's fighting style, a mixture of Obi-Wan's defensive technique and an aggressive power that mirrors his own, Vader would realize the truth. This is his son, the child he thought died with Padme, the son the Emperor told him was lost. Vader's reaction would be complex. In the original timeline, Vader wanted to turn Luke and use him to overthrow the Emperor. That desire would be even stronger here because this Luke is already powerful, already trained, already a formidable Force user. Vader would see in Luke not just a son, but a worthy successor, someone who could stand beside him and help him rule. He would try to convince Luke to join him, offering power, offering answers about the Force, offering a relationship with his father. You have been trained well, but your master has hidden the truth from you. I am your father, and together we can bring order to the galaxy. Join me, and I will complete your training. Luke's response would be fascinating. He's not shocked by the revelation like an Empire, but he's still facing his father for the first time, the man who fell to darkness, who destroyed everything Obi-Wan held dear. Luke might be tempted, not by the offer of power, but by the desire to understand his father, to find some remnant of Anakin Skywalker beneath the mask. But his training, his discipline, and his loyalty to Obi-Wan would hold him back. He would refuse, but unlike in the original timeline where he simply rejected Vader, this Luke might try to do what Obi-Wan couldn't or wouldn't. He might try to redeem his father right there. You don't have to serve the Emperor. You can come back. You can be Anakin Skywalker again. Help us destroy the Sith and restore the Jedi. This appeal would shake Vader. In the original timeline, it took years and multiple encounters before Vader was willing to turn back. But hearing these words from his son, from someone who has his power and his potential, might crack Vader's armor, metaphorically speaking, much earlier. He might not turn immediately. The Emperor's control and Vader's own pain and anger are too strong for that, but doubt would be planted. And doubt is dangerous for a Sith. The Emperor, of course, would sense this disturbance. He would realize that Vader has found his son and that the boy is a threat. In the original timeline, the Emperor tried to turn Luke or have Vader kill him to prove his loyalty. The same dynamics would be at play here, but with a more powerful Luke and a more conflicted Vader. The Emperor might try to arrange a confrontation sooner, wanting to either corrupt Luke or eliminate him before he becomes too dangerous. But let's talk about Leia for a moment, because this timeline affects her too. In the original story, Leia was raised as royalty on Alderaan, becoming a senator and a leader in the rebellion. She didn't know she was Force-sensitive until much later, and she never received any Jedi training during the original trilogy. In this timeline, things might unfold differently. If Luke and Obi-Wan joined the rebellion, they would inevitably cross paths with Leia, and Luke, with his heightened Force sensitivity from years of training, would sense something about her. He might not immediately realize she's his sister, but he would feel a connection, a familiarity, something he can't quite explain. Obi-Wan would realize the truth immediately. He knows Leia is Anakin's daughter. The question is, would he tell Luke? Would he tell Leia? In the original timeline, this secret was kept until Return of the Jedi, and Leia received no training. But if Obi-Wan sees Luke and Leia together, sees their potential, he might decide that both twins should be trained. Imagine Leia learning she's Force-sensitive, that she's Luke's twin sister, that her real father is Darth Vader. This would be a massive shock to her identity. She's defined herself as Princess Leia Organa, as a leader, as a political figure. Suddenly learning she's a Skywalker, that she has the same dark legacy as Luke, would force her to reevaluate everything. If Leia began Jedi training even late, she would be formidable. She has the same bloodline as Luke, the same potential. Her training might be more rushed, more focused on practical application, but with Luke and Obi-Wan as teachers, she would advance quickly. And here's the terrifying question. Would this Luke, trained from birth, disciplined and powerful, be more resistant to the dark side than the Luke we know? Or would he be more vulnerable? On one hand, he's had years to prepare, to understand the dangers, to build mental defenses. He's not the impulsive farm boy rushing into things. On the other hand, he's also more isolated, more emotionally stunted, possibly more repressed. The Jedi Order's approach of suppressing emotions and attachments didn't prevent the Sith from corrupting Jedi. It arguably made them more vulnerable. A Luke who has been trained to suppress his emotions, who has never had normal relationships, who has been preparing his whole life for a war against evil, might be a powder keg waiting for a spark. The critical moment would come during a confrontation with the Emperor. In Return of the Jedi, this happened on the Death Star 2, with the Emperor trying to turn Luke while Vader watched, conflicted. In this timeline, the confrontation might happen earlier, in different circumstances, but the core dynamic would be similar. The Emperor would try to make Luke angry, to make him give in to hatred and fear. He might threaten Leia, or Obi-Wan, or the rebellion. He might reveal truths about the Force that challenge everything Luke has been taught. The dark side is not evil, young Skywalker. It is merely power. Your father understood this. Why do you think the Jedi fell? Because they were weak, divided, clinging to outdated dogma. You could be so much more. Luke's response in this moment would determine everything. The Luke we know from Return of the Jedi threw away his lightsaber and declared himself a Jedi, like his father before him. He refused to fight, refused to fall, even when tortured. That Luke had experienced loss, friendship, love, and hope. He had lived a life beyond just training. This alternate Luke might not have those same emotional foundations. He might be more willing to fight, to use aggression, to do whatever it takes to win. And that pragmatism, that willingness to cross lines for the greater good, is exactly how one falls to the dark side. But there's another possibility. Maybe Obi-Wan's constant vigilance, his fear of losing another apprentice, would actually save Luke. Maybe Obi-Wan would recognize the signs of Luke being pushed toward darkness and intervene. In the original timeline, Obi-Wan died early, leaving Luke to find his own path. In this timeline, Obi-Wan would be present for longer, able to guide Luke through the most dangerous moments. Obi-Wan might even sacrifice himself, not in a duel with Vader, but in a way that teaches Luke the ultimate lesson about the light side, that true strength comes from compassion and self-sacrifice, not from power. Let's imagine a climactic battle. The rebellion has discovered the location of the Emperor. Luke, Leia if she's trained, and Obi-Wan lead a strike team. They fight their way through Imperial forces. They confront Vader, and this time, it's not just Luke facing his father. It's Luke with his master beside him, with his sister beside him, with everything he's trained for his entire life coming to this moment. The duel would be spectacular. Vader against multiple Jedi, but not just any Jedi, his former master and his children. The emotional weight would be crushing for Vader. Every strike from Luke would remind him of his own youth. Every defensive move from Obi-Wan would recall their time together. And if Leia is there, her very presence would represent the family he destroyed. During this battle, the Emperor would be watching, manipulating, trying to turn the situation to his advantage. He might try to force Luke to kill Vader, to prove himself. He might try to make Leia fall to protect her brother. He might even try to kill Obi-Wan to remove Luke's anchor to the light. The Emperor is infinitely patient and cruel, and he would exploit every weakness, every attachment, every fear. But here's where the alternate timeline could produce a different outcome. In the original story, Luke's victory was in refusing to fight, in choosing compassion over hatred. That same choice would be available here, but the path to it would be different. This Luke has been trained his entire life. He's powerful enough to actually defeat the Emperor through combat, something the original Luke never was. The temptation wouldn't just be to give in to anger, but to believe that he's strong enough, skilled enough, righteous enough to destroy the Sith through sheer power. And that belief, that pride, is itself a path to darkness. Obi-Wan would recognize this danger. He lived through the Clone Wars. He saw powerful Jedi fall. He watched Anakin become Vader. He knows that defeating evil with violence and power doesn't work. It just perpetuates the cycle. At the critical moment, Obi-Wan might do something radical. He might lower his lightsaber. He might throw it away. He might stand between Luke and the Emperor and refuse to fight, forcing Luke to make a choice. Will you kill me to get to him? Have I trained you only to create another weapon of war? Or have I taught you what it truly means to be a Jedi? This moment would break Luke out of his combat focus. He would see what he's becoming, a warrior so focused on destroying the enemy that he's forgotten the principles he's supposed to uphold. And in that moment of clarity, Luke would make the same choice his original self made. He would refuse to fall. He would choose compassion. And he would appeal to Vader one more time, but this time not as a desperate plea, but as a genuine offer from someone who understands the Force, who has been trained, who knows the cost of the dark side. You can still come back. Not for me, not for the rebellion, but for yourself. You don't have to be Vader anymore. And Vader, watching his son reject power, watching his former master stand peacefully, perhaps seeing in Leia a reflection of Padme, would finally break. The Emperor would try to kill Luke, raising his hand to unleash Force lightning, and Vader would do what he did in the original timeline, but earlier, less damaged, possibly even surviving. He would grab the Emperor and throw him down, destroying his master and breaking his own chains. The aftermath of this timeline would be fascinating. If Vader survives, if he truly turns back to being Anakin, the galaxy faces a complicated situation. Anakin Skywalker is responsible for terrible crimes. The Jedi were wiped out partly because of him. Planets suffered under his enforcement of Imperial will. Can he be forgiven? Should he be? Luke would argue yes, that redemption is possible, that his father proved it by turning back. But others in the rebellion, including possibly Leia, would struggle with this. How do you reconcile the monster Vader was with the man Anakin is trying to become again? Obi-Wan would have his own reckoning. He would finally face Anakin again, not as enemies, but as the friends they once were. The conversations they would have, the grief they would share, the attempts to rebuild what was broken, these would be deeply emotional and complicated. Obi-Wan spent decades believing he failed Anakin. To see his brother return would be both a blessing and a reopening of old wounds. The New Republic would be established, but its relationship with the Jedi would be different. In the original timeline, Luke was the last Jedi, and he had to rebuild the Order from scratch, making mistakes along the way. In this timeline, you have Obi-Wan, an experienced Jedi Master from the Old Order Luke, trained from birth with a mix of old and new ideas, and potentially Leia, who has experienced both the political world and the Force. Together, they could create a new Jedi Order that learns from the mistakes of the past. Less dogmatic, less political, more focused on balance and compassion rather than just rules and suppression. But creating this new order would not be easy. The galaxy's relationship with the Jedi is complicated. Many people saw the Jedi as keepers of the peace during the Republic, but others blame them for not preventing the Empire's rise. Some might fear the Jedi, seeing them as too powerful, too dangerous. Luke would have to navigate this, to prove that the new Jedi are different, that they serve the Force and the people, not their own interests. Luke's personal journey would also continue. In the original timeline, Luke struggled with the legacy of the Jedi and with the responsibility of training new students. In this timeline, those struggles would be different, but no less significant. Luke would have to confront the fact that his entire childhood was dedicated to a single purpose, that he never had a choice in becoming a Jedi. He might resent this, or he might embrace it, but either way, it would shape his approach to training others. Would he insist that new Jedi be trained from childhood like he was? Or would he argue for a different approach, allowing people to come to the Force later in life, after experiencing the world? There's also the question of Luke's personal relationships. In the original timeline, Luke had a connection with Mara Jade in the extended universe, eventually marrying her. In this timeline, Luke's ability to form romantic relationships would be heavily impacted by his upbringing. He's been trained to suppress attachments. He's spent his life focused on duty and discipline. Would he even be capable of falling in love, of allowing himself that vulnerability? Or would he struggle with it, seeing emotional connections as dangerous, as the thing that destroyed his father? Leia's role in the post-Empire galaxy would also be crucial. In the original timeline, she became a political leader, using her skills and experience to help build the New Republic. If she's also trained as a Jedi in this timeline, she would have a unique perspective, bridging the gap between the political world and the Force. Obi-Wan's role in the post-Empire galaxy would be interesting. In the original timeline, he died on the Death Star and became a Force ghost. guiding Luke from beyond. In this timeline, he might survive much longer, possibly even living to see the New Republic established and the new Jedi Order taking shape. This would be both a triumph and a challenge for him. He would finally see the Jedi returned, his life's work not entirely in vain. But he would also have to grapple with how much the galaxy has changed, with whether the old ways still apply, with whether he can adapt to a new era. Anakin's redemption, if it happens, would be one of the most compelling storylines in this timeline. How does someone come back from being Darth Vader? How does he face the people he hurt? How does he deal with the guilt of his actions? In the original timeline, Anakin died moments after turning back, never having to face the consequences of his choices. In this alternate timeline, if he survives, he would have to live with what he's done. He would have to try to make amends, knowing that nothing he does can truly erase the past. His relationship with Luke and Leia would be central to this. Luke might be more forgiving, having trained his whole life to understand the dangers of the dark side and the possibility of redemption. Leia might be less forgiving, having suffered more directly from the Empire's actions, having lost her adopted family when Alderaan was destroyed. If that still happens in this timeline, the galaxy's reaction to Anakin Skywalker's return would be mixed at best. Many would call for his arrest and execution for war crimes. Others might see his turning back as an act of ultimate heroism, saving the galaxy from the Emperor. Anakin himself might argue that he deserves punishment, that he should face justice for what he's done. But Luke and Obi-Wan might argue that he's needed, that his knowledge and power are too valuable to lose, that he can do more good alive and helping than he can dead or imprisoned. This would create a moral dilemma for the New Republic. Do you pursue justice for past crimes? Or do you prioritize the practical benefits of having a redeemed and repentant Darth Vader on your side? One of the most significant changes in this timeline is the impact on other characters. Han Solo, for example, plays a crucial role in the original trilogy. He's the skeptic, the practical smuggler, who learns to believe in something greater than himself. He's the one who comes back to save Luke during the Death Star attack. He's the one who loves Leia and fights alongside the rebellion despite his better judgment. But in this alternate timeline, would Han even meet Luke? The circumstances that brought them together on Tatooine wouldn't exist. Luke wouldn't be a farm boy looking for passage off-world. He would be a trained Jedi working with the rebellion. Han might still become involved with the rebellion through Leia, but his relationship with Luke would be completely different. Instead of the brotherly friendship that developed through shared adventure and mutual respect, Han might see Luke as just another mystic warrior type, someone impressive but distant. And Luke, raised without normal social interactions, might not know how to connect with someone like Han. Their dynamic would lack the warmth and humor that made it so memorable in the original films. Chewbacca's role would similarly be affected. In the original timeline, Chewie became like a protective uncle figure to Luke, and their relationship grew naturally through their adventures together. In this timeline, that organic development might not happen. Chewie would still be loyal to Han, and through Han's involvement with the rebellion he might cross paths with Luke, but the deep bond they shared might never form. These changes might seem small, but they would have ripple effects throughout the story. The original trilogy wasn't just about Luke's journey, it was about the relationships he formed, the family he chose. Without those connections developing naturally, something essential would be lost. Yoda's role in this timeline is another fascinating consideration. In the original story, Luke went to Dagobah to find Yoda and complete his training. Yoda tested Luke, trained him, and ultimately helped him understand what it truly means to be a Jedi. But in this alternate timeline, would Luke even need to go to Yoda? He's already been trained from birth by Obi-Wan. However, Obi-Wan might still believe that Luke needs Yoda's wisdom, that his own teaching is incomplete without the perspective of the Grand Master. Obi-Wan might take Luke to Dagobah at some point during his training, perhaps when Luke is a teenager, to receive Yoda's guidance and approval. The meeting between Luke and Yoda in this timeline would be very different. Yoda wouldn't need to test Luke's patience or commitment. Those qualities would already be evident. Instead, Yoda might focus on testing Luke's emotional balance, his understanding of the Force beyond combat, his connection to the living Force rather than just the cosmic Force. Yoda, with his centuries of experience, would immediately sense Luke's strengths and weaknesses. He would see the power, the discipline, the skill, but he would also see the isolation, the repression, the potential for darkness that comes from too much control and not enough understanding. Yoda might actually push Luke to be less like a traditional Jedi, to embrace his emotions rather than suppress them, to understand that the Force is about balance, not just light. This would create an interesting tension. Obi-Wan, scarred by his experience with Anakin, would want Luke to be controlled and disciplined. Yoda, having witnessed the fall of the entire Jedi Order, would recognize that the old ways failed and that a new approach is needed. Luke would be caught between these two perspectives, trying to honor both his masters while finding his own path. This internal conflict might actually be healthy for Luke's development, forcing him to think critically about what he's been taught rather than just accepting it. The relationship between Obi-Wan and Yoda in this timeline would also be significant. In the original story, they were separated, each in their own exile, communicating only occasionally through the Force. In this timeline, they might work together more closely, combining their efforts to train Luke. But they would also have disagreements. Obi-Wan would be protective, cautious, perhaps even overprotective. Yoda would be more willing to let Luke face challenges, to let him make mistakes and learn from them. These disagreements might mirror the differences between Qui-Gon and the Jedi Council, with Yoda ironically taking the more progressive stance in his old age. Having learned from the Order's mistakes, the impact on the Force itself is worth considering. In the original timeline, the Force was out of balance during the reign of the Empire, with the Sith dominating and the Jedi nearly extinct. Luke's emergence and his ultimate choice to reject the dark side helped restore balance. In this alternate timeline, the process of restoration might be different. With Luke trained from birth, the Force would begin moving toward balance earlier. The Chosen One prophecy is about Anakin bringing balance, but perhaps in this timeline, that balance comes through his children rather than through his own redemption. Luke and Leia, if both trained, would represent a new generation of Force users who are neither Sith nor traditional Jedi, but something in between, something better. This new understanding of the Force would be revolutionary. The old Jedi saw the Force in terms of light and dark, good and evil, with attachment and emotion being paths to darkness. The Sith embraced passion and power, seeing the dark side as strength. But Luke and Leia, trained with the knowledge of both traditions and the failures of each, might develop a more nuanced philosophy. They might understand that the Force is about balance, that emotion isn't evil but needs to be understood and channeled properly, that attachment isn't forbidden but must be balanced with duty, that power isn't inherently corrupting but depends on how it's used and why. This philosophy would shape the new Jedi Order in profound ways. Instead of taking children from their families and raising them in isolation, the new order might allow Jedi to maintain connections with their loved ones, to understand that love and compassion are strengths, not weaknesses. Instead of forbidding marriage and family, they might embrace these relationships as part of what makes Jedi human, as anchors to the light rather than paths to darkness. Instead of serving the Republic or any political entity, they might remain independent, offering guidance and help, but never allowing themselves to become weapons or tools of the state. But implementing this new philosophy would face resistance. There would be those within the Rebellion and the New Republic who want the Jedi to be heroes, warriors, champions who fight the Empire and its remnants. They would pressure Luke and the others to be more aggressive, to use their power more directly. There would also be former Jedi survivors who cling to the old ways, who believe that the traditional code is sacred and that any deviation is dangerous. Luke would have to navigate these pressures while staying true to his vision of what the Jedi should be. The Emperor's contingency plans would also play a role in this timeline. In the expanded lore, Palpatine had various backup schemes in case of his death, including Operation Cinder, cloning facilities, and other methods to ensure the Empire's survival or his own return. With a more powerful Luke and a potentially earlier defeat, some of these plans might not be executed, or they might be discovered and stopped before they can take effect. However, the Emperor is nothing if not thorough. He might have anticipated the possibility of Vader's children being trained and have specific plans to deal with that scenario. Perhaps there are hidden Sith artifacts or dark side users in reserve, ready to emerge if the Emperor falls. The exploration of these threats would provide ongoing challenges for Luke and the new Jedi Order. It's not enough to defeat the Emperor and Vader. They have to root out the corruption that the Sith spread throughout the galaxy over decades of rule. Darkside cults, Imperial loyalists, crime syndicates that thrived under Imperial rule, all of these would continue to be problems. Luke's training would make him effective at dealing with such threats, but it would also test his philosophy. How do you deal with evil without becoming evil yourself? How do you use power responsibly? How do you protect people without controlling them? One particularly interesting scenario would involve Luke encountering other Force users who aren't Jedi or Sith. The galaxy is vast, and there are many Force traditions beyond these two. The Night Sisters of Dathomir, the Guardians of the Wills, the Lasat, and others all have their own relationships with the Force. A Luke trained from birth might be more open to learning from these traditions, recognizing that the Jedi don't have a monopoly on understanding the Force. This openness would enrich his knowledge and make him a more well-rounded Force user. But it would also challenge some of the assumptions he was raised with. If the Force can be understood in so many different ways, what makes the Jedi way the right way? Or is there even a single right way? These philosophical questions would be at the heart of Luke's character development in this timeline. In the original story, Luke's journey was about becoming a Jedi, about living up to a legacy. In this alternate timeline, Luke's journey would be about defining what a Jedi should be, about creating a new legacy rather than restoring an old one. This is arguably a more complex and mature story, one that deals with questions of tradition versus progress, of learning from the past without being bound by it, of finding your own path even when you've been raised with a specific purpose. The relationships Luke would form with other Force-sensitive individuals would be crucial to this journey. If Luke discovers other people with Force potential and begins training them, each student would challenge him in different ways. Some might be older, bringing life experience and perspectives that Luke lacks. Some might resist the discipline Luke was raised with, preferring a more intuitive approach. Some might struggle with the dark side, forcing Luke to confront how he deals with failure and redemption. Through these interactions, Luke would grow not just as a teacher but as a person, learning to be less rigid, more empathetic, more understanding of different paths. The political landscape of the New Republic would also be significantly affected by this timeline. In the original story, the New Republic struggled to establish itself, facing internal divisions, external threats, and the challenge of governing a galaxy that had been under authoritarian rule for decades. With Jedi actively involved from the beginning, these challenges might be easier to overcome. Luke and Leia, with their combined political and Force abilities, could help identify threats, root out corruption, and provide moral leadership. But there's a danger here too. The Old Republic fell partly because the Jedi became too involved in politics, too willing to lead armies and make decisions that should have been left to elected representatives. The new Jedi Order would need to find a balance, offering help without dominating, providing guidance without controlling. Leia's unique position as both a Jedi and a political leader would be crucial to maintaining this balance. She understands politics in a way that Luke, raised in isolation, never could. She knows how to negotiate, compromise, build coalitions, and navigate the complex web of galactic governance. But she would also have the Force as a tool, allowing her to sense deception, understand people's true motivations, and make decisions guided by something beyond just political calculation. Her dual role would make her incredibly influential, but also incredibly scrutinized. Every decision she makes would be questioned. Is she acting in the Republic's best interest, or is she advancing a Jedi agenda? Can she be trusted to balance her Force abilities with her political responsibilities? These questions would create ongoing tension and drama in the post-Empire galaxy. There might be movements to limit Jedi involvement in government, or demands that Force users register and be monitored. Some might see the Jedi as saviors, while others view them as a dangerous concentration of power that needs to be checked. Luke and Leia would have to navigate these attitudes carefully, proving through their actions that the new Jedi are different from the old, that they can be trusted to use their power responsibly. The long-term implications of this timeline extend far beyond the immediate aftermath of the Empire's fall. The next generation of the galaxy would grow up with a very different understanding of the Force and the Jedi. Children would hear stories not just of Luke Skywalker the hero, but of Luke Skywalker the lifelong Jedi, trained from birth to be a guardian of peace. These stories would shape how people view the Force, how they view power, and how they view the role of exceptional individuals in society. Some might be inspired to seek out Force training themselves. Others might resent the Jedi, seeing them as elites with unfair advantages. The issue of Force-sensitive children would become a major policy question. Should they be identified and trained? Should training be mandatory or optional? Should the government have any role in regulating Force users? In the Old Republic, the Jedi took Force-sensitive children and raised them in the temple. In the Empire, Force-sensitives were hunted and killed or turned into Inquisitors. The New Republic would need to find a better approach, one that respects individual freedom while also recognizing that untrained Force users can be dangerous, both to themselves and others. Luke's own experience, having no choice in his path, might make him advocate for a system that gives Force-sensitive individuals options rather than mandates. The construction and location of a new Jedi temple would be another significant decision. The old temple on Coruscant was a symbol of Jedi power and influence, standing at the heart of the Republic. But it was also a target, and its connection to the political center may have contributed to the Jedi's downfall. Luke might choose to build the new temple somewhere remote, somewhere disconnected from political power, emphasizing that the new Jedi are servants of the Force, not servants of the state. Or he might choose multiple smaller training centers spread across the galaxy, making the Order less centralized and less vulnerable to a single catastrophic attack. The curriculum of this new order would reflect everything Luke has learned. Combat training would still be important. Lightsaber skills and Force abilities are necessary for Jedi to defend themselves and others. But there would be equal emphasis on meditation, philosophy, history, and ethics. Students would learn not just how to use the Force, but why to use it, and when not to use it. They would study the fall of the Old Republic and the rise of the Empire, understanding the mistakes that were made and how to avoid repeating them. They would learn about the Sith, not just as enemies to be destroyed, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of pursuing power for its own sake. Importantly, students in this new order would be encouraged to maintain connections with the outside world. They would be allowed, even encouraged, to have friends and family outside the order, to understand how ordinary people live, to stay grounded in the reality of the galaxy they're meant to serve. This would prevent the insularity that plagued the old order, the sense that Jedi were separate from and superior to ordinary people. By staying connected, the new Jedi would be more empathetic, more understanding, and more effective at actually helping people rather than just enforcing abstract principles. The role of technology in this new order would also be interesting. The old Jedi relied heavily on technology, using starships, communication devices, and various tools to accomplish their missions. But they also maintained a connection to more ancient traditions, building their own lightsabers and using the Force in ways that seemed almost mystical. The New Order, growing in a galaxy where technology is advancing and changing rapidly, would need to decide how to balance these elements. Luke, having been trained in isolation, might have a more traditional approach, emphasizing the Force over technology. But younger Jedi, growing up in the connected galaxy, might integrate technology more fully into their practice, using it to enhance their abilities rather than replace them. The question of what happens to Darth Vader's legacy is particularly compelling in this timeline. In the original story, Vader died a redeemed man, but most of the galaxy never knew about his turn back to the light. He remained a symbol of evil and oppression. Anakin's knowledge of the dark side would be valuable to the new Jedi Order. He understands the Sith, their techniques, their philosophy, their methods in ways that no one else does. He could teach new Jedi how to recognize dark side influence, how to resist it, how to pull back from the edge even after you've started to fall. But allowing a former Sith Lord to train new Jedi would be controversial, to say the least. Many would argue that it's too dangerous, that Anakin can't be trusted, that he might consciously or unconsciously corrupt his students. Luke would have to decide whether the benefits of his father's knowledge outweigh the risks and the political costs. The emotional journey of this timeline, for all the characters involved, would be intense and complex. Obi-Wan would experience the full range of human emotion, from the grief of losing Anakin to the joy of training Luke, from the fear of repeating his mistakes to the pride of seeing his apprentice grow into a great Jedi, from the pain of war to the hope of rebuilding. His character arc would be about learning to forgive himself, to accept that he did the best he could with the knowledge he had, and to find peace even while living with the consequences of the past. Luke's emotional journey would be about discovering his humanity. Raised as a Jedi, trained for a single purpose, Luke would have to learn what it means to be a person beyond just being a warrior or a Force user. He would have to confront the fact that he never had a normal childhood, never got to make normal choices, and decide whether he resents this or embraces it. His relationships with others, particularly if he attempts to form romantic connections, would force him to grapple with vulnerability, with the fear of loss, with all the emotions he's been trained to control. And through this struggle, he would come to understand what his father went through, why Anakin fell, and how to avoid the same fate not by suppressing emotions but by accepting and understanding them. Leia's journey would be about integrating two identities. She's Princess Leia Organa, leader, diplomat, warrior, but she's also Leia Skywalker, Force-sensitive daughter of Anakin, twin to Luke, part of a legacy she never asked for. Reconciling these identities would be challenging. She might resist her Jedi heritage at first, seeing it as a distraction from her political work or as something that makes her less relatable to the people she leads. But eventually, she would come to see that her Force abilities don't diminish her other qualities. They enhance them. She can be both a Jedi and a leader, and in fact, being both makes her better at each role. Anakin's journey, if he survives and redeems himself, would be the most painful and profound. He would have to live every day knowing what he did, the people he killed, the suffering he caused. No amount of good deeds can erase that. His redemption wouldn't be a single moment of heroism. It would be a lifetime of trying to make amends, knowing that he never fully can. His relationship with his children would be strained. Luke might forgive him more easily, understanding the path to darkness through his training. Leia might never fully forgive him, holding on to her anger and grief over the destruction he caused. And Anakin would have to accept that he doesn't have a right to demand their forgiveness, that the best he can do is be present, be honest, and try to help however he can. The galaxy's healing process after the Empire would take generations. Planets that were devastated need to be rebuilt. Systems that were oppressed need to find their voices again. The economic and social structures that sustained the Empire need to be dismantled and replaced with something better. The Jedi in this timeline would play a role in this healing, but they couldn't and shouldn't do it alone. They would work alongside politicians, activists, ordinary citizens, all the people who make up a functioning society. And in doing so, they would demonstrate what the new Jedi Order stands for, not domination or control, but service and support. There would undoubtedly be challenges and setbacks along the way. Some worlds might reject the New Republic and the Jedi, preferring independence or even harboring imperial sympathies. Criminal organizations would fill power vacuums left by the Empire's collapse. Force-sensitive individuals might reject Jedi training and go their own way, potentially becoming threats. Economic crises, social unrest, and political conflicts would all test the stability of the new government and the wisdom of its Jedi protectors. Luke and the others would have to navigate these challenges without the certainty that often comes with being raised for a single purpose. They would have to make difficult decisions, sometimes without clear right answers, and live with the consequences. The ultimate question this timeline poses is whether destiny can be changed or whether certain events are inevitable. In the original story, there's a sense that the Force has a will, that certain things were meant to happen. Luke was meant to become a Jedi, Vader was meant to be redeemed, balance was meant to be restored. But if you change the circumstances dramatically, if you train Luke from birth and alter the entire trajectory of events, do you achieve the same ultimate outcome through a different path? Or do you create an entirely different future, one that's neither better nor worse, but simply different? This philosophical question doesn't have a clear answer, and that's what makes it interesting. Maybe Luke was always destined to bring about the Empire's fall and his father's redemption, regardless of when or how he was trained. The Force working through him would guide events to that conclusion. Or maybe the specifics matter enormously, and changing Luke's upbringing would create a cascade of different choices and outcomes that lead somewhere completely different. Perhaps the answer is somewhere in between. Certain broad strokes are inevitable, but the details vary based on the choices individuals make. What we can say with certainty is that this alternate timeline would give us a very different Luke Skywalker. Not the idealistic farm boy who became a hero, but a trained warrior who had to discover his humanity. Not someone who learned to use the Force through brief, intense training and natural talent, but someone who studied it deeply from birth. Not someone who chose to become a Jedi, but someone who never had any other option. This Luke would be more powerful, more skilled, more knowledgeable. But would he be as inspiring? Would his journey resonate in the same way? Would the galaxy embrace him as a symbol of hope, or see him as just another tool of those in power? These are the questions that make this alternate timeline so fascinating to explore. It's not just about changing plot points or action sequences. It's about how those changes would ripple through characters, relationships, philosophies, and the very fabric of the Star Wars universe. Training Luke from birth seems like it would make everything easier, solve problems more quickly, lead to faster victory. But in reality, it would create its own set of challenges and complications, trade one set of problems for another, and force everyone involved to grapple with difficult questions about power, purpose, and what it truly means to bring balance to the Force. So what do you think? Would the galaxy be better off if Obi-Wan had trained Luke from birth? Would Luke himself be happier, or would he be burdened by a childhood he never got to have? Would the relationships that made the original trilogy so memorable still develop, or would they be fundamentally different? And most importantly, would this timeline truly change Luke's destiny? Or would the Force find a way to guide him to the same ultimate choices regardless of how he was raised? These questions don't have definitive answers, but exploring them helps us understand what makes Star Wars meaningful. It's not just about the spectacle of space battles and lightsaber duels. It's about the choices people make, the relationships they form, and the never-ending struggle between light and darkness, both in the galaxy and within ourselves. Thank you so much for watching, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Would you want to see this timeline play out? What do you think would happen differently? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Star Wars what-if scenarios, and may the Force be with you, always.